In the Legend of Khiimori, stats and genetics are the two main things that matter when pairing up horses. Your horse's ability to navigate hostile environments is important to ensuring the deliveries go smoothly, and because the game utilizes realistic horse genetics, pretty much anything is possible. In this guide, I'm going to be discussing horse genetics, horse stats, and pretty much everything that's relevant to breeding horses in this game. If you have a specific horse in mind you're trying to get and aren't quite sure how to make it yourself, this is the guide for you. Chapter 1. How to unlock breeding. In order to get access to breeding horses, you need to have finished all of the main original quests in the game. This includes the one where you buy your very first horse. Once you've completed the last quest of buying your first horse, you will then need to have at least 3 horses in order to start breeding. I'd recommend buying some okay-ish stat horses, as this is probably where your lineage of horses is going to start foundation-wise. Once you have 3 horses, you'll want to put the horse that you don't want to breed as active, and then leave the other 2 in the stable. Make sure you have 1 mare and 1 stallion, and you should be able to select the horses in the breeding menu. Chapter 2. Understanding the breeding menu. Now that we're actually in the breeding menu, I'm going to explain all of these little panels and what all these symbols mean. On the left-hand side here, it shows us both of the parent horses. It shows the mare on the top and the stallion on the bottom. If you want to swap out either one, you can click on one. Looking at the right side now of the panel, this shows what potential foal we will have based on the combined genetics, stats, and the types of traits the parents have. The little icons here on the bottom left represent traits. Traits are kind of just this quirky way of adding a little bit of individuality to the foals. It's things like, oh, they like galloping on grass, or oh, maybe they don't like running in hot weather. Things like that. Next up is stats. There's the stats potential, which is the dark green, and then there is the actual stats the foal will be born with, which is the lighter green. Now, on top of these little bars, you might see all these little circular symbols. These represent the potential actual skills that your foal will be born with. These include things like heat tolerance, cold tolerance, less chance to stumble, less chance to freak out in bad situations. Note that you have to train in order to unlock these effects, but if you have a higher stat parent, you can sometimes unlock a couple of these skills right away at birth. Also, anytime you see a dice on any of these things, it means that it's a randomized choice. The last thing you need to know about is the Add Blessings panel. The Blessings panel is what lets you manipulate the coat that the foal will have. We'll get into this more later, but for now, just remember where it is. Chapter 2.5. Stats, Skills, and Traits. A foal's stats upon birth are determined by the stats of the parents. The foal's stats are calculated mathematically by adding both parents' values for each stat and then dividing that by 2. So, for example, if the mother is 286 endurance and the father is 403, then the baby is going to have an endurance of 344. Next, we're going to talk about skills. Skills are unlockable bonuses at different intervals in the horse's training stat-wise. So, there's an unlockable skill at 300, 500, and 800 in each of the different stat or attribute bars. Note that the amount of possible skills is dependent on the parents and the genetic potential of the foal. The foal is able to inherit an attribute that sits at the same spot as the parents. So for example, the mother has heat tolerance at 300 in endurance, and the father has cold tolerance at 300 in endurance. The baby has a 50% chance to inherit either the cold tolerance or the heat tolerance. In situations where the foal has one parent that has a skill at that level, then the foal will inherit whatever skill that one parent has at that level. The last thing we're going to look at here is traits. Traits are inherited from the parents, and the amount of traits your horse has is dependent on how many traits the parents have. It's possible for a horse to have no traits, but you can have up to 3 traits per horse. The pairing we're looking at right here has 1 guaranteed trait, as demonstrated by the outlined orange boxes with the dice. The dice just means that it's going to be pulling a trait from the pool of options here, made by the parents. On the second column, this square with a star in it indicates that there is a small bonus chance of inheriting another trait. And on the third column, there are X's through both boxes and no extra icon beneath, indicating that there is no way for this foal to have a third trait. When breeding horses with more traits, there's a bit more options open up to you. When a column has 2 check marks, it means there's a 100% chance of there being a trait in the first slot. When there's an X and 1 check mark, it means there's a 50% chance that there will be an additional trait. This is the case for the third column here as well. So, this foal is guaranteed to have at least 1 trait, but there's a 50% chance it might have a second, and a 50% chance it might have a third. The dice icons indicate that it'll be randomly selected from the options listed here, and there's also a chance here for there to be a random trait not listed. The best advice I have when it comes to traits is not taking them super seriously, but just making sure that you're not breeding horses that have traits that you personally don't like, or at least trying to breed the traits out of their future generations. Technically, any horse currently at the moment in-game can traverse cold or hot environments with the right tonics. Although right now it's manageable, it's possible in the future that they will make these things much more influential on the gameplay. So, my advice? Get ahead of the curveball, breed horses that are happy in less than ideal circumstances, not ones that are even more sad in unideal circumstances. Chapter 3. Horse Genetics. The Legend of Khiimori utilizes a realistic genetic system similar to the one in real life with real horses. Little disclaimer, I am not an expert on this topic at all, and I'm just trying to explain it in a very watered down way for beginners to genetics in this game, in context with this game. And if the way I explain genetics doesn't really make sense to you, the good news is there's plenty of other resources online that can help out and teach you horse genetics. First things first, let's learn how to understand a gene set. So as of right now in game, there's currently 8 different genetics that your horse can be affected by. Extension, Agouti, Dun, Champagne, Cream, Leopard, Grey, and Tobiano. When a pair of letters on these genes is lowercase, that means that the gene is not affecting the horse's appearance. When an uppercase letter is present in a pair of genes, that means that gene is affecting the horse. These pairs of lowercase letters are recessive genes, and this basically just means they don't have any impact on the horse's appearance at the moment. When a horse is recessive in all of its genes, it's a chestnut. Chestnuts can come in different shades. Currently there are 3 that I found in the game, but I'm sure there will be more added in the future. Now you might be wondering, if when everything's recessive the horse is chestnut, how do you get a black or a bay coat? Now this is where the extension and Agouti gene come in. Let's look at the extension gene first. Think of extension as what turns a horse black. When there's the presence of a dominant E or an uppercase E, that means that this horse is going to have black pigment on its body. Where that pigment appears is dependent on the Agouti gene. If dominant extension is present in any way and Agouti is recessive, the horse will stay black. But if a dominant A is present, the horse will turn into a bay. The Agouti gene, when present, restricts any black pigment on a horse to just the legs, mane, and tail. Let's practice. Dominant E but no dominant A, black. Dominant E and dominant A, bay. Now that we understand what Agouti does, let's go back to our chestnuts. Remember how I said Agouti affects the distribution of black pigment on a horse? Well, when a horse has no extension, or black pigment, to restrict, Agouti does nothing. If a horse is recessive in all genes but has a dominant A, it's still a chestnut. Now, if you're still a little bit confused, that's okay. Here, I provided a little cheat sheet on what makes a chestnut, a bay, and a black horse. These are the genetic sets that your horse is going to need to match in order to have these colors. Now that we know how to get the base colors of chestnut, bay, and black, it's time to look at what the other genes do. Before we get any further into the other genes, we need to talk about heterozygous and homozygous. Heterozygous is when there's one uppercase letter and one lowercase letter. The Dun, right here, is heterozygous Dun, because there's one capital D and one lowercase d. Next up is homozygous, and homozygous is the word used to describe a gene that has matching letters. Homozygous can either be homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. I'm going to be using this terminology going forward in the video, so let's do a little review. Homozygous dominant means both letters in the gene pair are uppercase, homozygous recessive means both letters in the gene pair are lowercase, and heterozygous means there's one letter that's uppercase and one that's lowercase. If the gene is homozygous dominant or heterozygous, then the horse is being affected by that gene. Now that we know what heterozygous is and homozygous, let's look at what the genes look like in game. First, we're taking a look at the Dun gene. This horse is a heterozygous Dun. Duns have a lighter coat color and primitive markings on the legs and a dorsal stripe. When a horse is homozygous Dun, the primitive markings seem to get stronger in-game, with some extra stripes along the back, as well as the head occasionally getting darker. Next up is the Champagne gene. Champagne makes the coat lighter and brightens up the mane and tail. It also changes the color of the horse's eyes. Homozygous Champagne also makes the skin more pink around the eyes and nose and adds a little bit of mottling, but at the moment these are the only visual changes that I can see. Next is the Cream gene. Cream lightens the coat as well as the mane and tail, and when dominant homozygous, the cream will work overtime and make the horse super light. Next up is the Leopard gene. Leopard adds some white spots to the horse's coat. It's less when it's heterozygous, but when it's homozygous, well, I mean, you can see there's a lot more white on this horse than the heterozygous version. Next up is the Gray gene. If you know anything about horses, you probably know that gray horses actually are born with color, but they slowly turn to gray throughout their life. At the time of making this video, this isn't how gray works, but maybe it'll change in the future. On horses with a chestnut base, heterozygous gray just makes the horse a dark gray, whereas on black base horses, it seems like it actually adds a gray but with dapples pattern, and the chestnut base homozygous gray, much lighter than the heterozygous one. And last but not least, Tobiano. Tobiano adds a white patch pattern to the horse's coat. The only real difference I can see between heterozygous and homozygous at the moment is the homozygous Tobiano patterns seem to be a little bit more haired in, like you can see the individual hairs, but other than that, they're pretty similar. This concludes all of the genes that are currently in the game at the time of this video. Now that we know what each of the genes do, and we know how to read gene sets, it's time to start actually breeding our desired horses. Chapter 4. The Blessings Panel. Finally, we're going to put all of that genetics information to good use here with the Blessings Panel. Now that we understand genetics, we have one more thing we need to look at with these two pairs of horses. As you can see, the game shows the gene set of both of the parents. Genes that are highlighted in gold are things that both the parents share. For example, both of these horses are recessive in agouti, dun, and so on. However, unhighlighted genes show genes that differ between the parents. The extension gene, responsible for black, is different between these two. Because these two horses differ at this gene, we're able to influence how the foal inherits it in the Add Blessings panel. The game is letting us know here that there is a 50% chance that the foal will be heterozygous extension, and a 50% chance that it'll be recessive extension. Because we know this foal is recessive everywhere else, that means this foal has a 50% chance of being black and a 50% chance of being chestnut. If we wanted this foal to be chestnut, we could just click on the recessive ease, set it up to 100%, and boom, chestnut foal. However, I think I wanted to go for a black foal here, so I'm going to put my resources into the heterozygous extension instead. Once you've committed the resources you want to commit, you can press the Start Breeding button. It'll take roughly 4 hours for the foal to be born, so sleep for however long you like, and the foal will be there when you wake up. And... wow, would you look at that? It's a black foal. It's almost like we were able to predict this. When the foal is born, you can check the Show Details button, and it'll show you what genes were guaranteed 100% to be the way they are, and the ones that were modified. It takes 1 to 2 in-game days for the foal to grow up, so you can sleep ahead if you would like to speed up the grow-up process. And that's it. That's all there is to breeding horses in this game. I'll talk through one more slightly more complicated example with the Blessings panel. Things can get a bit messier when you've got multiple genes at play that are dominant in both horses, and we're going to talk about that here. When we pair up these two horses, we can see that there's a few more genes here where they aren't exactly the same. These horses differ at the extension gene, the champagne gene, and the leopard gene. No matter what though, we know this horse is going to be unaffected by agouti, dun, cream, gray, and Tobiano. Because neither parents carry any of these genes, there's no way for the horse to inherit them. So, let's focus on what we can control here. We know this horse, no matter what, is going to be recessive agouti, so it's either going to be a chestnut or a black if it inherits a dominant E. Personally, I like darker horses, so I'm going to go with the heterozygous E. Next up is Champagne. If you wanted a pure black horse, you would make sure that this is recessive, but I'm okay with it being a little lighter, so let's make it heterozygous. And last but not least, the Leopard. I love horses with spots, so I'm gonna make this horse be a heterozygous leopard. After sleeping 8 hours, we can run back to the tent and reveal the foal. And wow, would you look at that? It's a horse with a black base, affected by Champagne, that also has white spots. Whatever your dream horse is with these genes that we have in-game, it's doable. It just comes down to understanding what each gene does, how the genes work, and not just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks. If you want a pure black horse, you have to work towards breeding horses that are recessive in all genes but extension. If you want a horse with white patches, you have to breed a horse with Tobianos. Although understanding genetics might seem like a lot of work to teach yourself, once you've got it down pat, you're able to make pretty much anything you can imagine with the gene sets that are currently in the game. The last two things that I need to mention are socks and face markings. These seem to be random, but also possibly genetics related. There is no definitive gene, I don't think, that influences this at the moment, at least not one that's shown on the horse's genotype, but maybe in the future that's something that'll be shown. I've had horses pass on the same face marking multiple times, and also had horses pass on socks when they had socks to their foals, but there's also been times where I've gotten foals with no socks despite the parents having socks. And last but not least, crossbreeding. When you crossbreed horses, you have a chance to get either one of the parents' base models. In fact, if you want horses with like a different breed model but don't want dun, you're gonna have to breed that breed with Mongolian horses, as they're currently the only horse in the game that doesn't have homozygous dun. There's also a couple of genes like this AK and FE gene, which is assumed to be related to the breed given that it's dominant only in Ferganas and dominant only in Akoltekis. I think this gene might just be here to influence what model the horse has, but maybe it'll be used for something else in the future. And there you have it. That's my entire breeding guide in the Legend of Khiimori. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below and I will do my best to help. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye!